We've all been there. It's your turn, and in your mind, you've got an epic move planned for your character. You're going to make that incredible leap and strike the villain down with a mighty swing of your sword or spell.
The DM asks you to make an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. You've got advantage and a big bonus. You roll, the dice come up. Double once. You fail.
Bummer, right? Or is it?
Today we discuss embracing failure and why it can be more fun for the whole TTRPG experience when you do. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling. Before we get into this episode, I just got to vent for a second. I did not get enough breakfast this morning. I need a lot more protein in my system after my workout.
So I now have a new commute to the studio, and I just find in the morning I do not have enough time to have a nice breakfast that isn't just overloaded with carbs and sugar. You should check out this episode's sponsor, Magic Spoon.
In your mouth.
Whoa! Thanks, disembodied announcer voice.
This is delicious.
It tastes just like the nostalgia I have for my lost childhood.
13 to 14 grams of protein?
And it's got 0 grams of total sugars and 5 grams of net carbs? That's amazing!
Okay, seriously, I have been having this cereal for the last few days, and I remember months before this walking down the grocery store aisle and looking longingly at my childhood favorite cereals, and then going and buying the boring protein flakes that I always get now. And this tastes like my childhood cereal, but it's so full of protein, and that actually really excites me.
For me, I'm trying to do the high protein thing, and so this in the morning plus some high protein milk really sets me off on the right track, and I love that it doesn't have a ton of sugar or carbs in it either.
We're going to finish this cereal, but check out this week's episode.
Magic Spoon also offers delicious treats with only 1 gram of sugar per bar. Use the code DUNGEONDUDES or check the link in the description below to try Magic Spoon cereal or treats today and get $5 off. You can also find Magic Spoon on Amazon or in your nearest grocery store.
How's the peanut butter?
Oh, God.
Fruity's great.
So thanks to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this week's episode and sending us breakfast. Now on to this episode. We love RPGs because we get to play mighty heroes and interesting characters who can accomplish great things. But so often, the dice do not agree with us.
So many times I create a compelling, edgy character with a bold backstory, and I'm ready to bring this heroic, serious character to the game. And naturally, the first time I roll a 1, the whole thing falls apart and it becomes a slapstick comedy.
5e especially now has tons of ways for characters to turn a bad roll into a success. There's advantage, there's heroic inspiration, there's spells like guidance and enhance ability, and so many more things that swing the odds in the player character's favor. But the D20 remains a fickle die. The dice giveth and the dice taketh away, and characters still fail often. And so before you're tempted to fudge the dice, it's worth finding the fun in failure.
There is no great story that has been told where the heroes succeed at every task they set out to do. When the heroes lose, fail, and struggle, it creates tension and drama.
Failure can happen anywhere from when your characters miss an attack roll or fail a saving throw, or perhaps they entirely botch a skill challenge, just do not solve a vexing puzzle. Maybe a player character does die in combat. Maybe there is a battle that your characters have to run away from. Maybe occasionally your heroes are defeated, or even there's a total party kill.
We have many examples from our own games or even popular media. I think that one of the great examples is actually the very first episode of Dungeons of Drakkenheim, our own campaign, where our great fighter Pluto Jackson went to enter the very first dungeon, rolled a 1, slipped, fell, and rolled into a pit full of spikes and rats. We also have character deaths that have happened in our home games, that some of them not even that heroic. Sometimes you just take a bunch of acid damage while you're flying and it drops you down to 0, and then you take fall damage and that counts as 2 death fails, and there you go. We also have great examples from film and books, like Luke failing to Vader in Empire Strikes Back, or multiple examples from Lord of the Rings, like the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, breaking of the Fellowship, even Frodo succumbing to the ring, the Avengers lost in Infinity War. In the movie The Watchmen, or the comic book series, the heroes just flat out fail.
Yeah.
And I just recently finished up the current season of Dragon Prince, and to be spoiler free, it, as expected, the heroes get thwarted so many times with their compelling plans. There are a number of times in that show where the players, or not the players, the heroes lay out a well thought out plan that you think, okay, well, that sounds like it's going to work. And then the villains are just one step ahead of them and absolutely thwart them, causing them to have to revert to plan B, C, D, and so forth and so on until they are just scraping by. And that is good storytelling.
Setbacks, failures, and moments when everything goes wrong, even death, are all parts of compelling narratives and ways that stories raise the stakes and ultimately make the success feel much more meaningful. If you look at individual fight scenes in many movies, there are moments where the characters are put on the back foot, where their attack gets blocked or they stumble or fall, and those create tension and excitement when they turn it around. We love it when the underdog makes a comeback.
There aren't many stories out there where the hero succeeds at every task without difficulty. Usually, if you do find one of these stories, it's a sign of boring amateur authors making self-insert fantasy stories, with the exception of One Punch Man.
But One Punch Man is actually a parody of this because it shows how bored Saitama has become because he can't fail.
That is the point, is his whole character is making fun of this exact narrative element. And I think the players should embrace the fact that your characters should fail. And when they do, try and look at the story beat rather than the failings of your character.
Now, beyond recognizing that failure and setbacks are part of what makes a good, exciting, and compelling story, at the table when we're playing Dungeons & Dragons, one of the easiest ways to take the sting out of a failed dice roll is to simply laugh at it. The great playwright Samuel Beckett once said, "Nothing is funnier than unhappiness, after all."
Make sure to separate yourself from your character and don't take your character's failures as a reflection of yourself. You can enjoy the circumstances for what they are, and you don't have to take it personally. Often failures can be funny, so get behind the insanity. At our table, whenever we have to roll for wild magic, arcane anomalies, random mutations, to see if we get a random encounter, to see if things go horribly, horribly wrong because we're rolling that D6, we actually tend to get excited. You can actually see it in our actual play consistently that we are excited when things go insanely bad. We have had the whole table chanting potted plant, which by all means is actually a bad outcome to get, but we know it's going to be hilarious if it happens. That said, if someone is having a bad night and they're just bad luck on their dice rolls, they're rolling a bunch of ones, they aren't making any of their saving throws or ability checks, don't make them the joke at the table, because that feels bad.
Now, well, it's often the default to make failure funny. It doesn't have to mean that. And this is especially incongruous when we're trying to play maybe more serious characters, that it doesn't really make sense for the serious paladin to make a fool of themselves by failing at something. And this is where we can say failure doesn't need to mean incompetence. Or look at it like this. It's not bumbling or humorous at all. Incredibly skilled people fail at difficult things all the time. And in fact, sometimes incredibly skilled people are the only ones who can even attempt such difficult things and even have a chance at accomplishing it. And we can recognize even when those skilled people miss the shots. You know, you look at any sporting or high competitive sports, we can still recognize, wow, they're really good at this. One of my favorite examples, I think, from media is from 300, when Leonidas is throwing his spear at Xerxes. He misses. He does not kill Xerxes and get him squarely in the head, but the spear slices his cheek open and sheds blood. That is a dramatic, exciting moment. You have no doubt in that moment that that Leonidas could have made that hit, but it still has all this impact and meaning, and it hits hard in there. I think it's a very remarkable moment. And so you don't need to describe your character's failures as them being a bumbling fool, but rather taking that moment to highlight just how extreme that circumstance was, how difficult of a task it was, and that it's remarkable that they could even try.
I think that in your example, what's brilliant there is that if that was happening at the table and the player makes that huge throw and they miss, there's a chance that they go, oh man, that could have changed the whole game. But when we're watching the narrative, that is one of the most memorable moments in the entire film. And I think that it's one of the standout story beats that he makes a god bleed. And so remember that the next time that you throw your spear and miss, and it's like, oh, you just did 1 damage. Be like, I made him bleed.
I feel like that moment also resonates with the Tony Stark versus Thanos bit in Infinity War, where it's like all that for a drop of blood, but like that was the point.
That was the point, yeah.
And so I think it's about recognizing the tone that you want to take with failure. Right? Sometimes it's funny and everyone can have a good laugh over it. But sometimes you can make that failure into a very dramatic and interesting moment, and that still has a point and a purpose behind it that feels like it advanced the story rather than it was just making a punchline.
I think that role-playing games in general often see us enter the mindset of our characters, and a lot of us get really wrapped up in that. But it's valuable to keep your head in a space of knowing that you are a player in a game. Look at your characters as a valuable storytelling tool, and they are not you. Their failures are not your failures. It's not you being a bad player. They are vital storytelling moments that enrich the narrative. You can take the story seriously, you can take your character seriously, but know that the failure can be a lot of fun. Just because you whiff on the roll and fail, you can actually separate the intensity of the scene with laughter around the table. And sometimes watching a fire giant crit you for 150 damage can be a, I can't believe that just happened moment, instead of a, why did this happen to me moment. The game is not personal, so don't take it personally.
Now, at your table, the players and the dungeon master can work together to mitigate some of the sting of this in other ways. So laughing at it and also taking it seriously are two ways that you can reframe failure, but you can also use rules such as degrees of success and success at a cost, which were introduced in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide as really helpful ways to make failure much more interesting. And so I always like to make sure that when I'm asking players for a dice roll, that what's going to happen if they succeed and what's going to happen if they fail are both interesting outcomes. But I can also offer my players the opportunity for success at a cost. Maybe they're going to be jumping across that difficult gap, and they don't roll well enough to succeed. But I don't have to say, well, you failing means that your character falls to their death and die. I can now offer that character a bit of a devil's bargain. This comes from things like Powered by the Apocalypse games, or in particular Blades in the Dark, where you as the DM can say, okay, your character failed, but I'm going to give you the success, but you have to accept some kind of setback or other problem that puts you in a spot. Maybe you jumped across the gap and I'm going to say you made it, but you drop your weapon in the process, or you landed prone on the other side, or maybe you can even have that situation where you leap across, and as you leap across, the bridge collapses behind you, so you're now separated from the party because no one else is going to make it across either. There's a bunch of different things that you can pull out from your imagination to create that challenging circumstances that punch through the moment of failure, but don't make it kind of a no-win situation.
Another option that you can use is fail forward. This is something that I've seen at play in Monster of the Week, which is a game that I've run several times. And as a GM, you can turn a player's failure into momentum for a future success. Monster of the Week has an entire mechanic called Forward, where certain actions the characters take can create a Forward 1 or a Forward 2, which usually means that as long as they continue on the same course of action, they get to add a 1 or a 2 to their dice rolls moving forward. Moving this into D&D or other D20 TTRPGs, we might look at the idea of a character's failure puts them in a situation where either they maybe gain advantage on their next roll to do something different, or they create a clearing for another character to gain advantage. They might even stumble forward into success in a different way. Maybe they are walking on a creaky floor in an old abandoned house and they roll a failure to navigate that floor and they fall through. But in the process, their failure leads them to find a hidden clue or a secret entrance or something of that nature. This is also a form of failing forward. Yes, they failed their roll and they had to go through a detrimental situation, but what do they find as an outcome? We can use this sort of mentality a lot in our games to have failures lead to successes or to even set up another player for a better situation.
And what this all kind of boils down to is, as a DM, you want to be thinking about how you can always make the outcomes of failure and the outcomes when the players succeed interesting moments that are still going to move the story and the narrative forward in an interesting way. I think that the example of where this is often not executed well is Baldur's Gate 3, where often in Baldur's Gate 3, when you fail the dice rolls in the game, it just, no, this door slams shut.
You get the sound,
right?
The horrible sound.
Whereas I would contrast that to another game like Disco Elysium, where in Disco Elysium, when you fail, it's often way cooler and way more interesting than when you succeed. So that mindset of how you can still push things forward is a really important one to embody, because ultimately I think that one of the big issues that we see, and I see this at many D&D tables, I even recognize this in myself, is I think that a lot of people fear failure. I certainly do. And I think that our fear of failure makes us overly cautious and it makes us risk averse. So we avoid interesting and exciting circumstances. But D&D especially is a role-playing game where you kind of have to bite down on the plot hook. You kind of have to spring the traps to make the exciting things happen. More often than not, surviving the trap is way more interesting than just avoiding it and leaving it completely untouched.
My entire mentality when I play D&D, and you can definitely see this in our show, is to not be afraid of getting into trouble. Sometimes the most fun thing you can do if you think it's a trap is to spring it. D&D isn't a game about winning. Sure, you want to be triumphant against the evil villains and successfully survive the combat encounters, but the most fun you can have at the table, in my opinion, is causing absolute chaos and somehow still coming out on top. So don't be afraid to get into the thick of it. Don't be afraid to spring the trap, get into the situation, and blow things up. And sometimes springing the trap is the most fun you can have at your table.
If you leapt across that chasm, you flubbed the attack roll, well, fortunately, that's why we've got extra attack. That's why you got the next turn. That's why we have the next moment. We have our party members. We have all these ways of deepening the story and creating that evolving back and forth to the narrative. And so we don't have to put all that pressure on a single die roll, even though it can be these exciting moments when it does happen.
I think that when you do fail, even if it's a catastrophic failure by the whole team, remember what might lie in the future for your characters, and remember all of the beautiful moments in all of your favorite stories where the heroes had to fail in order to later succeed. Without giving too many spoilers, even in our own campaign, we suffered a major failure. And I remember the episode coming out recently of a pretty bad failure and people being like, wow, that was a bad fight and it did not go well. And how are they going to recover from this? And it swung into what I think was one of the greatest arcs of our entire show, which wouldn't have happened if our characters hadn't failed first. And this has actually happened multiple times through the show. In so many narratives, the failure that the players or that the heroes experience at a crucial moment leads to a plot line or an adventure that then swings it in the other direction. So embrace the failure as a step in the path of your character's journey. If you have some amazing failures that you've experienced at your table that you had a lot of fun with, or if you have tips or other great moments in media that you have seen incredible failures that then turn into a success, tell us about all that in the comments below.
We have just launched some incredible new rewards for our Patreon supporters, including early access to our videos before they're posted on YouTube, as well as a very special look at our future writing projects, including new subclasses, spells, feats, and more that you can try out in your games. If any of this sounds interesting to you, or you just want to help support the work that we do here on YouTube, follow the links down in the description below to join our Patreon community. And best of all, when you do, you get into our patron-only Discord server, which is an incredible place to chat with us, find other people to play games with, and get even more advice and help with your games.
And if you want to see a party fail regularly and embrace it, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings right here on YouTube. You can check out all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got lots of great coverage of tips for dungeon masters and players right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
In the dungeon.